Now that you know what objects you want to include on your background, we are actually going to compose your background. For this step, you're going to need your basic hand drawn out like you watched in the last video, and all of your background that you have planned out already. You might also still need Google as a resource for this step. So I'm going to start with a frog just like I did with my last video, because I started with frog when I was brainstorming the first time. I originally had the frog on top of the mushroom, but I'm like, you know what's better than the mushroom? The hand itself. So I started to draw my little frog right on top of my hand. I just picked one object and I used that as a starting off point for the entire composition. So when I'm doing this, I want to make sure to interact the objects with one another. That's a big thing we're going to be focusing on, along with focusing on having different sizes of objects represented in your composition. So you need at least one large object, 2 or 3 medium large objects, and then a few small objects just to fill the entire composition. It creates a more dynamic composition in the background. It's more appealing to your eye to look at when that's completed. So I have drawn my medium-sized frog, and then I started to think, how else can I add these objects into my composition? I started to think about what I drew next when I was originally doing my planning, and that was the fungi. And then I was thinking about different types of fungi than the original that I saw, and I was like, oh, there are these cool ones that grow on trees. Maybe I can incorporate that and I can apply it to the arm so that it looks like the fungi is growing off of the arm. So start to think of different ways that your objects might be able to interact with your hands themselves. It just doesn't need to be other illustrated objects. So this could be either hanging from your hand, falling from your hand, grasping onto it, growing from it, going around it, wrapping around it. There are so many different ways that your objects can interact with your hand itself. That's why we have just drawn the base of the hand first and not added any shading in yet. So you see that I am just going in with a very light pencil touch right now. That's just in case is when I'm going in with my composition, if I ever want to change anything, I can just go back in and erase it easily. So we are going to be going over these with Sharpie eventually when you're on your very nice paper, but we're just going in with pencil first. I moved on to fish. I found a really cool fish. I think it was the same one that I found when I did my original sketch. And then I started to just draw him in, as you see here. When I did draw my fish, you can see that I'm not going to add all of the beautiful waves that flow through his body. I am going to wait and I'm going to develop those a little bit more with a Sharpie themselves. We are not going to be coloring these in, and it's just going to be a basic line drawing in the background. So I am not going to focus on the details quite yet. I'm going to do that more on my nice paper, with the one that I actually want to spend the most time and put my most effort into it. This is just my basic sketch. I can generalize which ones I want to do. So I started going in thinking I wanted the blowfish, and then I saw this little cutie right here. So I decided that I need another medium to large type object. I have my frog right now, which is a medium, my fungi, that's a medium, my first fish is pretty large. So I went in and then I decided to draw this guy pretty big. So he's interacting with the other objects around him because he is hiding behind the hand that I have right now. And you can see I even cut off some of his face. He looks kind of shy, hiding behind his hand. Now that I've added a few more smaller details into my fish, I'm going to be moving on to another part of my composition. I thought I was going to want to do another fish, but I decided that I still really liked that fungi, that mushroom that I chose for my initial sketch. And the fish that I drew had polka dots on it, and that really reminded me, it connected in my brain, that it reminded me of those red fungi that I drew the first time. So I decided it would be cute to draw it on top of his head. I feel like the objects go really well together, and that's something that I can incorporate into my composition, and it fills up the left side of my page, which is lacking a little bit right now. So I am good on fungi, I am good on fish for right now. I'm going to move on to adding food. I thought with something that is more flowy, and of course spaghetti. I initially started looking for fancy spaghetti, but I couldn't find anything that I really liked, like the stuff that gets twirled together. So I kind of used the image that was in my head with a small reference image, and I'm like, where would be a perfect place for my spaghetti and I guess some meatballs? And of course on top of the frog's head. Where else would you put spaghetti, obviously? So I'm just drawing in light spaghetti marks. I'm like, this could also fill some space. So I used the flowing lines of my spaghetti to kind of fill the space that's still on the left side of my page. I'm like, what else goes with spaghetti that's kind of food? Need a smaller object kind of to go in this top corner. Of course, I thought of a block of cheese. So when I'm drawing my cheese, I'm like, what else can fill up this left space that's a little bit smaller? So I decided to also add some shredded cheese into the mix. So at this point, I'm like, I have enough big objects. I need something more flowy to fill this space, something that is going to just graduate through and connect everything together. And I was thinking more flowers on this side. Flowers are one of my most favorite things to doodle, especially the really flowy flowers. Originally I went in, I'm like, maybe I'll do some roses, maybe I'll do some daisies, some of the basics, but instead I went in with my own favorite illustrator style, and I incorporated that into my composition. At this point, I have a majority of my page filled in with small objects. I would count the flowers as a smaller object because they are they're flowing through the page. They don't take up a decent amount of space just in themselves. I have my larger objects like my fish, my medium, more smaller size objects like my cheese and frog and meatballs and spaghetti. I'm like, I think I need one more fish. I remember this beautiful flowing betta fish, and I'd really like to add him into my composition. I think the way that his fins flowed down could really incorporate with the beauty of my floral designs. So I decided to add just one more betta fish to fill in my entire composition. So at this point, my composition is filled in with my variety of objects that I've chosen. They're kind of interacting with one another at this point. I can always refine that at a later time, and I'm ready to move on to my nice paper.